You on?
Okay. Good evening. Thank you very much for coming. Before I start, I just want to apologize first of all for my English. It's never perfect. And second, that drasha Shabbat HaGadol is supposed to be on Shabbat HaGadol. So it's still, I tried finalizing it to this point, but I'm sure that in Shabbat, if we want to come to hear that in Hebrew, it will be better. So I apologize in advance if there are things that aren't fully finalized or polished yet, but we'll try. So, and just before we start, I would eventually talk about the question, which was the subtitle in the title, that what do we do in Leil HaSeder? What do we experience? Is it a history story lesson? Excuse me. Is it a history lesson, or is it a religious experience? Is something that we should experience in the present, or something that we try to re-experience or relearn the past? But before I start, I just want to make two notes. First of all, I don't have to remind you that there's a very old and well-established custom of Ma'ot Chitim, and I'm sure everyone is giving Ma'ot Chitim. It's very important, especially during this time. So there are numerous places to give Ma'ot Chitim, especially in this neighborhood, but each one should, find a place and do his part in Ma'ot Chitim. That's the first comment before we start. The second one is that this year Shabbat HaGadol falls on the exact same date like it was on Yetziat Mitzrayim. Yetziat Mitzrayim, 10th of Nisan, fell on Shabbat. Shabbat HaGadol. This year also the 10th of Nisan is Shabbat. We're now Wednesday. It's Vav Nisan, or it's Zayin Nisan now, and Shabbat will be the 10th of Nisan. And Rashi on Pasuk Vav brings a midrash that says, why did they need to have those mitzvot? This taking of the lamb before 4 days before the actual Pesach on Yudalid, that was a mitzvah that only occurred in Egypt. It was a one-time mitzvah that only occurred there. And why did they need to take the lamb 4 days in advance? So Rashi mentions a midrash, brings a midrash that speaks about the two mitzvot that Am Yisrael needed to have before they could have gotten out of Egypt. In order to get out of Egypt, Am Yisrael needed zchuyot. Am Yisrael needed some more positive, a more positive balance in his behalf. So they needed some more mitzvot. So they had Dam Pesach and Dam Milah, and the taking of the lamb 4 days in advance. That was part of gaining mitzvot towards Yetziat Mitzrayim. And now we're standing in difficult times. There are difficult times here in Israel, and I think also worldwide. It's not the simplest of times, and sometimes that's also a solution. We standing here a week before Pesach and trying and starting to להתכונן is usually I have more audience that once I give them a word in Hebrew, they respond with a word in English. Prepare. Yeah, it was just missing a word. Yeah, prepare. We're starting or finishing. I don't know. There are people. My wife's mother who starts on Tu B'Shvat. But no, there are people who start, or people who finish or finalize their preparations for Pesach, and those small actions, those small deeds, they have a great impact. We're in difficult times when we need salvation, when we need something good to happen, and we're looking up to the Kadosh Baruch Hu, and we ask Him to make something good out of reality and to make reality better. Those small actions we do along the way, those small actions of preparation to Pesach, could tilt the balance in our favor, and Be'ezrat Hashem can make a lot of good. So that's another thing we should have in mind in this coming week, going out to Pesach. So we have three words that basically line, or line I think is a good word. The HaGadol, that they appear in the beginning and at the end. No, line is not a good word. There's
define.
Not define, but they
illustrate.
No, they basically sort of a bookends to the Haggadah,
Okay.
and they appear in the beginning and at the end. And those three words are Pesach, Matza, and Maror. And what are Pesach, Matza, and Maror? Those are the three mitzvot that are, how do we do those mitzvot? We eat. Those are at the end, those are mitzvot that we do through eating. Those are the mitzvot. But they appear in the beginning and at the end. At the beginning, right after the four sons, we have the four sons, and each has his own question, and each deserves a form of answer. It's not really an answer. We don't give the answer yet, but we are defining the form of the answer that we'll give each son. And right after that, the Haggadah begins the answer. And what is the answer? It begins with a midrash halacha, that says, when should we talk and tell the story of Pesach, Yetziat Mitzrayim? Yachol meRosh Chodesh? Should we start from Aleph Nisan, from Rosh Chodesh? Talmud lomar bayom hahu. The pasuk says, "V'igata levincha bayom hahu lemor, ba'avur ze asa Hashem li v'tzitim miMitzrayim." So the midrash asks, should we start from Rosh Chodesh? Answer is no. Bayom hahu, that day. What is that day? The same day that we're sacrificing the Pesach, and that's the next answer, the next question of the midrash. Yachol mib'od yom, should we start telling the story when we start sacrificing the Pesach, which is on Yudalet day, not when we do Leil HaSeder. We do Leil HaSeder when we eat the Pesach, but we sacrifice it starting from noon, or right after noon, on the previous day, on Yudalet. Yachol mib'od yom, Talmud lomar ba'avur ze. בעבור זה לא אמרתי, אלא בשעה שיש מצה ומרור מונחים לפניך. When should we tell the story of Leil HaSeder? When should we tell the story of Yetziat Mitzrayim? Only when we have those things lying in front of us. And what are those things? Matzah and Maror. Why doesn't it mention Pesach? So actually it's a machloket rishonim. Shibolei HaLeket, which was one of the Rishonim from Italy, was a doctor from Italy, says that in the time of the Mikdash, the version should have been בשעה שפסח מצה ומרור מונחים לפניי. And because we no longer have Korban Pesach, so we changed the version we changed the words in the Midrash to make it more relevant. We only have Matza and Maror, so we say Matza and Maror. But there's another answer. Many Rishonim explain that no, that is the Midrash. Why don't we mention Pesach? Because if we would have mentioned Pesach, so we would go back to the first question. Yachol mibod yom. Pesach, it's in front of us from the afternoon of Yudalid. We only want to focus on what is unique for Leil Tetvav, for Leil HaSeder, for what we call Leil HaSeder. So that's why we don't mention Pesach. And at the end of the Magid, that was the beginning of the Magid. I said that it frames, that was the word I was looking for. It framed the Magid. Right? So that was the beginning. What do we have at the end? At the end we have the famous drasha of Rabban Gamliel. Rabban Gamliel, it's a drasha that is mentioned in the Mishnah. It's a Mishnah in the 10th chapter, Perek Yud, in Pesachim, Arbe Pesachim, Mishnah Hey, the 5th. רבן גמליאל היה אומר, כל שלא אמר שלושה דברים אלו בפסח, לא יצא ידי חובתו. ואלו הם, פסח, מצה ומרור. So Rabban Gamliel says, whoever didn't say those three words, did not fulfill his obligation. And what are those words? Pesach, Matzah, and Maror. And there is something very odd about this saying, because as we said at the beginning, Pesach, Matzah, and Maror are all mitzvot of eating. Why shouldn't we mention them? Why do we have an obligation to mention those words? What does that mean? We have an obligation to eat Pesach. We have an obligation to eat Matzah. We have an obligation to eat Maror. But why saying them? What is this drasha? It's very odd. And also the order of things, right? It says Pesach, Matzah, and Maror. Well, Pesach, Matzah, and Maror, it all comes naturally for us because we are used to that saying since we were basically remember ourselves, right? But if we would think about it, if the whole concept of Leil HaSeder is telling Yetziat Mitzrayim, right? Telling the story of Yetziat Mitzrayim, what should have been the order of those words? Maror, the beginning of the story, chronologically, is with the Maror. The Maror, we all know, symbolizes slavery, the enslavement, the hardship of slavery, the merirut, the bitterness of slavery. So we should have started with that. Going to the Pesach, and the Pesach is the center. Why the Pesach is the center? Because the Pesach was the very act that represents the salvation, the Geulah. It's a transformative act from the bitterness and the hardship of slavery to freedom. That is the center. And what should have been in the end? The end of the three? Matzah. Because matzah represents freedom. When did they eat matzah? Not when they were slaves. When they were slaves, they ate bread or whatever the Egyptians gave them. I guess bread. But when did they start eating matzot? When they had to go out of Egypt, and in the desert. In the desert you eat matzot. You can see that Eliyahu also eats matzot in the desert. This is what you eat in the desert. You don't have time, you don't have the equipment to leaven your bread. You make matzot. That's the food of the free spirits that go in the desert. It's something quick, nutritious. So they ate matzot. That represents the Geulah. So why is the order of Rabban Gamliel different than the chronological order? Going from Pesach, Matza, and Maror. And I think that in order to answer that question, we should start with talking about each and every one of them. Pesach, Matzah, and Maror. What is Pesach? Pesach is a korban. It's a sacrifice that each and every individual should be a part of. Not each and every one sacrifices the Pesach. Actually, the Gemara, the beginning of the second chapter of Kiddushin, learns the concept of shlichut. How do you say shlichut in English? I know that a proxy is a shaliach, but how do you say shlichut? Whatever. You all understood me, I guess. Okay. So, shlichut, the whole concept of shlichut is learned, from one of the opinions, is learned from Pesach. ושחטו כל עדת ישראל, והלא כל העדה כולם שוחטים, ואנו אינו שוחט אלא אחד. In each and every group of people, there is only one that goes into the mikdash and is doing everything. The group, the chavura, in the language of Chazal, they are called chavura. The chavura, each and every one only gets a kazait, a bit more maybe. And they eat it at the very end. So the Pesach is eaten in a gathering of people. And there's another halakha in the Rambam that I think is very relevant sometimes in our Leil HaSeder. The Pesach, we said, there's a chavura, there's a defined group of people that is eating that particular Pesach, that particular lamb or sheep. Lamb. And they know it ahead of time, and they prepare. It's called being you should be a member of a group, a menuim. You should be a member of such a group. If you're not a member, you can't eat. But the Rambam also rules that such a group should not be a group all made out of either slaves or slaves with women or slaves with children. And why is that? Because of kalut rosh. Because of light-headedness. When we sit down to have our Leil HaSeder, to have our Seder, sometimes we really want to focus on transmitting the story and engaging the small kids. It's a big deal. It's one of the major mitzvot of Leil HaSeder. But sometimes we try to do it so much that it could lead to some sort of lightheadedness. And Leil HaSeder should be fun, should be engaging, should be inclusive to all ages and to all participants, all the members of the chavura, but it should not lead to lightheadedness. So that was the Pesach. We don't have the Pesach, unfortunately, so there isn't much to talk about. But we do have Matza, right? We have Matza and Maror. And there's a difference between Matza and Maror. We said that we have 3 mitzvot that we fulfilled through eating. One is the Pesach, of course, it's the Oraita. If we had Korban Pesach, that would be the main mitzvah, you could call it, eating the Pesach. And we have Matzah. There's actually, among the Tanaim, there's a machloket, whether Matzah is an independent mitzvah, or it's something that only applies when it's only a sort of it comes with Pesach. Al matzot u'merorim yochlu, right? The pasuk says, Al matzot u'merorim yochlu. So there's a machloket among the Tanaim, whether there's a separate mitzvah of eating matzah or not. Is eating mitzvah when we don't have Pesach a fulfillment of a biblical law, mitzvah deoraita, or it's only a mitzvah derabanan? We rule that eating matzah is, of course, mitzvah deoraita. It's actually the only mitzvah, eating mitzvah deoraita we have. The only way I can eat something deoraita is on Leil HaSeder, eating that matzah. But we do have sarid. We have a trace of that opinion that matzah isn't an independent mitzvah in the korech. Right? We do sort of a pshara. Pshara is a compromise. Yeah, between those two opinions, because we eat the matzah individually, and then we have the korech, which is lekayem al matzot u'merorim yochlu. Chachamim know the pasuk, of course, of al matzot u'merorim yochlu, that seems that it's only the Maror and the Matzah is only accompanying the Pesach, but they have other pasuk, ba'erev tochlu matzot, that tells them that we also have an independent mitzvah of eating the matzah on Leil Pesach, even if we don't have the Pesach. Sorry. There's another question regarding the matzah. What is the matzah? What is the matzat mitzvah? What is the matzah that you're obligated to eat? And when you have an obligation to eat something, you have to eat a whole kazait, right? The minimum quantity of eating defined by the Torah is always a kazait. And this question, which matzah is the matzah that you have to eat, makes our life a bit harder, because we have, according to Shulchan Aruch, we have 3 kazaitim we have to eat, because we have to eat when we get to motzi matzah, right? We have to eat we say the bracha on the matzah, al achilat matzah, and then you have to eat a kazait, right? You have to eat a kazait. The Shulchan Aruch says that you also should eat a kazait at the same time, a kazait from the hamotzi. You have to eat on that occasion, you have to eat 2 kazaitim. One for the matzah, for the mitzvah of the matzah, of eating matzah, and one for the motzi lechem. In general, when we eat bread, we eat a kazait in order to be. So you have to eat 2 kazaitim then, and then a kazait for the korech, and then another kazait, because some say that the actual matzat mitzvah is not at the beginning, what we call motzi matzah, but the afikoman. At the end, very end of the seder, the last thing we eat, we should represent actually not the matzah of the mitzvah, but what? But the Pesach. And again, it has some sort of connection to the machloket, to the controversy, whether we eat matzah as an independent thing from the Pesach or not. Whoever says that we eat on the afikoman, that's the kazait of the mitzvah, basically says that when do we eat the kazait of the matzat mitzvah? When we would have eaten the kazait of the Pesach together. Now we don't have the kazait of the Pesach, but we still eat the kazait of the matzah at the very end. So if you follow that, if you added the numbers, we have 4 kazaitim to eat. Actually, many achronim say, and whoever finds it difficult could rely on the Mishnah Berurah and others, that we don't need another full kazait for the motzi lechem, for the bracha and the matzah itself. The same kazait could be, you can eat a kazait and something for the motzi lechem. So then you only have 3 and something kazaitot, right? 3 and something kazait. But still, what is a kazait? Because
your battery's going down. Okay.
What can I do? What is a kazait? And if you have 3 kazaitot le'echol, to eat, the kazaitot, it's automatically I continue in Hebrew. So if you have 3 kazait to eat, or 4 if you want to be more stringent and follow the Shulchan Aruch, that could add up to a lot of matzot, not talking about kazait of Maror, something of karpas. We have and a meal, a festive meal, and you should eat the afikoman at the end, not an achila gasa, meaning you shouldn't force yourself eating. You should still be able to eat, able to put something in your mouth, which many of us don't get to that point. After 3 kazaitot and maror, and 2 maror because of the korech, and 2 of the maror because of the korech, and something of the if you eat 1 leaf of celery or whatever in the karpas, it still adds up to quite a bit. Especially if you're eating something in the meal. Who doesn't eat knedel? No, whoever doesn't eat gebroch. So. But now I saw that in Osherad they have some sort of a substitute, non-gebroch knedel. So they're also fine. So it adds up to quite a bit. So what is the shiur kazai? So that, I don't want to get into that whole sugya of how did some poskim get to a conclusion that the zaitim, the olives we have, must be at least double than what Chazal was speaking about, and Tzlach said it, and many others. But at the end of the day, there are 2 or 3 major opinions. There is an opinion, a very well-established one, that a kazait is a kazait. We all know how much an olive is. if you'll find the biggest one you could find. There are pretty big ones. So you'll get to 6 or 7 cubic centimeters, something like that. So it's quite big, but it's not awful. And there are people who extend that to 17, 27, and 50 cubic centimeters. 50 is a whole matzah, a whole machine matzah. Something like that, which is a lot. If you're trying to eat 4 of those, it's very, 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 very hard. So a good, I think, compromise between those deot is to eat the kazait of the actual motzi matzah, which is, to most opinion, and this is how we generally paskin, that's the kazait of the mitzvah. That is the kazait of the mitzvah. In that case, if a person can, he should eat half a matzah on that kazait, which is the 50 centimeters cubic centimeters. It's just it doesn't make any sense. Even that opinion is not very well established, but there are people who say that, and it's quoted. Generally, that's quoted as the dat Chazon Ish, even though the Chazon Ish itself, in many places, wrote that Meikar Adin, the kazait is kazait, very simple, which is, he claimed something around 7 cubic centimeters, which is small. So if a person can eat that, should eat in that particular one half a matzah. If not, a very well established opinion is a third of a machine matzah. I'm talking about machines, which is they're very identical, so it's very easy. Third of this matzah is also a very well established opinion that you can eat a third as the matzat mitzvah. And again, there are always questions. All of those matzot could be a matzat mitzvah, but there is a big place, a big room to say that in the other matzot, again, if someone can, he should eat also the afikoman as a third matzah, a third of a matzah. But if he doesn't have the ability or the strength, or he would get very, very full, and he would eat the afikoman as achila gasa and not an achila lasova, meaning he would eat it, he would force himself to eat it and not eat it with some sort of enjoyment. One should eat for the other matzot an actual zayit, which is in a matzat mechona, in a machine matzah. It's probably a small square of some sort. That could be a matzah and a kazait of matzah. And again, if someone could, myself, I tried many years. I tried the bigger portions, but it's just very, very hard. So each and every one should find his recipe of between all those kazaitim, eating 1 or 2 of them, the kazait of the motzi matzah and the kazait of the afikoman, the bigger opinions, and the others as the smaller opinions. And we have the maror. Maror is a vegetable. Why is it called maror? Because it's bitter, right? And the Mishnah actually has a list of 5 things that are called maror. Chazeret, olashin, tamcha, charchavina, umaror. 5 things. And there are actually people who say that the Rambam, many people who say that the Rambam says you only fulfill the obligation of eating maror through those 5 species. And the Gemara gives translation to each and one of them. In the language of the later poskim in Europe, tamcha, one of those species mentioned in the Mishnah, became chrein, what we know as chazer, but in Hebrew. But those terms had a great shift between them, because chazeret, and that's completely widely agreed, that chazeret of the Mishnah is what we call lettuce, chasa. Chasa in Aramaic, and chas in Arabic, and it's very well established. All the Rishonim identified it that way, and that raised the question. Even in the Talmudim, even in the Bavli and the Yerushalmi, how come chasa is mentioned first? And many understood that there's the list, the upper you get in the list is better than the last one. Only the last one is called Maror. Actually, that's the last option in the Mishnah is called Maror. Many poskim say that, and Rabbi Hoshaya in the Gemara says, mitzvah lechatchila bechazeret, meaning in what we call lettuce, chasa. That's the ideal vegetable to use as maror. But there's a problem. What's the problem? Maror should be bitter, and chasa is not very bitter. So the Yerushalmi starts explaining that chasa, if you leave it in the ground at the end, it will be very, very bitter. And actually, the chasa, the chasa, which is at the beginning of the list, is basically cultivated, something that humans cultivated out of the last thing in the list, the maror. The maror is the wild, the same plant, but the wild version. So, of course, people cultivated it to be less bitter. So it's now sweet when you eat. Sometimes it has very slight bitterness, but it's not as bitter as the other species. But in Europe, they had no lettuce, right? They didn't have any lettuce, and it was only the end of the frost. And in Europe, they only grow lettuce in summer. It's just cold. Before the summer, you can't grow lettuce. So you don't have lettuce for Pesach. In Eretz Israel, you do have, because in Eretz Israel, it's a winter crop, and in Europe, it's a summer crop. So you do have lettuce here. But in Europe, they didn't have lettuce. So what did they start eating? And in general, the truth is, they didn't have any type of green or leafy vegetable at that point. And all of the examples in the Mishnah are leafy things. The Gemara describes it as something that has sort of a shiny leaf and has white sap. The Gemara gives identification symbol, so you can identify a maror. But in Europe they didn't have it. So what did they start eating? The chrei. But many poskim went against. It was the widespread minhag. Definitely, everyone ate it. But certain poskim were very much against it. The Chacham Tzvi was the father of Rabbi Yaakov Emdin in Hamburg, and others claim that it's first of all, you can't eat a whole kazait out of it. If we're talking about kazait, is the minimum portion is about 7 cubic centimeters. It's a nice portion, and if you chew on such a portion, it's sakana. Many poskim said it's really unhealthy. It's very unhealthy. And also the Rav Kook has a tshuva on that topic, claiming that you should grind it first and give it time to evaporate. If you let it to rest for some time, it gets less sharp. And many others said, well, basically that's very sharp, but it's not bitter. And if the whole idea is that we should feel bitterness, we don't feel any bitterness. It's not the thing. So now when we're in Eretz Israel, I think that ideally one should eat chasa, should eat lettuce. If he finds that his lettuce has no bitterness, even if he eats the stem and things like that, which is more bitter, or the inner parts sometimes are more bitter. So another very good option, which my friend offered me a few days ago, and I really found very sounds very good, is to eat, I don't know how to say that vegetable in English, but andiv. I guess, yeah. Which is more, it's very similar to chasa, to lettuce, what we have. It's mentioned in the Mishnah as the second most desired type of maror, or lashin, in the Mishnah. It's definitely the same identification, and it's much more bitter, and there's no problem of eating kazaita of it. It's just a bit bitter, but people do eat it, so it's a good compromise eating hafa. And also that there's this concept that in maror you can eat half of kazait from one thing and half of kazait from another thing, because we emphasize the bitterness, and the bitterness joins between the two. So you can eat some chasa and then some endive, and you can fulfill the whole mitzvah. And whoever has his custom is to eat horseradish, the chazeret, so I won't deny you of that minhag, but because one of the things we do emphasize in Leil HaSeder is minhagim, but I do think that because many poskim question that the usage of horseradish for many reasons, some of them I didn't specify here, one should try at least in one of his marorim, do it from the chasa, and the compromise of doing. I've seen many people who put shredded horseradish on the lettuce leaf. That, in my opinion, isn't a good compromise. It's better to eat one kazait of this and one kazait of that, because the Gemara says that you should not put charoset on your maror, because you won't feel the bitterness. And if you put something sharp, and if you define that sharp isn't bitter, those are two different things. So a better compromise is to separate between them completely and not eating them together, and then you don't have the benefit of any of them. So we've talked about the 3 mitzvot of Leil HaSeder, the 3 eating mitzvot of Leil HaSeder: Pesach, Matza, Maror. But we haven't talked about why whoever doesn't say those words, lo yatsa yedei chovoto, he didn't fulfill his obligation. Why is that? What does Rabban Gamliel is trying to say to us, and which obligation he didn't fulfill. So there's actually a controversy, a machloket, among the Rishonim. What does Rabban Gamliel mean when he says, Lo yatsa yedei chovato? First of all, we all need to know that for most of the Rishonim, they interpret it in a more educational way. Meaning, if someone didn't say during his Leil HaSeder, Pesach, Matza, Maror, and he ate all of them, he still fulfilled his mitzvah. He didn't do mitzvah min hamuvchar. He didn't fulfill it completely. But if he just ate it, and there are situations that in the army and many other situations that you just need to do the mitzvot. I remember there when I was in the army, there are rations. There are general rations and there are Leil HaSeder rations. In the Israeli army, they have a Leil HaSeder ration, which is also, everything is very, very preserved. You can keep it for many years. And the charoset comes in sort of I don't know, it's not a very good charoset, but everything is very preserved. That's the only place you can find kedem, actually, in the Israeli army, because their grape juice probably lasts for a long time, I don't know, but you can find those in those rations, and it comes with a small manual that tells you what you should eliminate from your seder if you only have a short time to do it. And eventually, the heart of the seder is eating. Pesach we don't have, not in the rations at least. But we do have matzah, and we have arba kosot, which is slightly different obligation. But we do have arba kosot, we do have matzah, and we do have maror. So those things are the heart of the seder. So if you ate them, you fulfilled the obligation. You didn't do mitzvah min hamuvchar. You didn't fulfill it in the most mitzvah min hamuvchar. So what obligation you didn't fulfill? It's a machloket rishonim. It's a controversy among the Rishonim. The Rashbam and the Ramban say that you didn't fulfill the obligation of eating. If you haven't said Pesach, Matzah, or Maror, you haven't eaten Pesach, Matzah, or Maror. But the other group of Rishonim, which is the Rashbats, Shlomo ben Tzemach Duran, and the Ravan, they say you didn't fulfill the obligation of HaGadol. HaGadol, telling the story of Yetziat Mitzrayim. And what is the difference between those two? Why do one understand you didn't fulfill the mitzvah of eating, and one understand you didn't fulfill the mitzvah of telling or saying? I think that goes to the first question we asked in the beginning of this shiur. And that's the question, what do we do on Leil HaSeder? What is the concept? What are we doing? What are we doing that night? Do we have a history lesson? Do we emphasize the V'higadta lebincha? That's the only purpose of Leil HaSeder? Or do we have an experience? There's a very well-known machloket. I don't know if to call it a machloket, but in all of our Agadot, it's written, Chayav Adam lir'ot et atzmo, כאילו הוא יצא ממצרים. Adam should see himself as he had left Egypt, as if he's experiencing the salvation that night. But in the Rambam, and many quote him, that the obligation חייב אדם להראות את עצמו כאילו יצא ממצרים, to show himself. What's the difference? The difference is, what time are you celebrating? Are you celebrating the salvation out of Egypt? You're celebrating something that occurred almost 3,000 years ago, or a bit more actually, 3,000 years ago, and you're only telling the story. People quote the Rambam as it's a wonderful thing to do a whole demonstration, a whole play and everything. But that play, you only stage the salvation. You only stage the Geulah. You don't experience it now. That's not the purpose. You stage, you replay, you react the salvation of Egypt, but not the salvation you experience now. But lir'ot et atzmo is something that sometimes can be much more meaningful. Lir'ot et atzmo. It's very hard, lir'ot et atzmo, to see yourself as if you are being salvated, you experience Geulah here, and this night you experience this religious experience, and you relive it. You don't react it. You relive this experience of the Geulah. Sometimes that is as harder. And I think that is exactly the machloket of what happens when you don't say Pesach, Matza, Maror. Do we eat because we want to experience it now? Or do we eat only in order for the children to ask or to react something that happened? And actually, Professor David Henishke, that lives here, has a wonderful book on Nanosedet. And he claims in one of the chapters that originally, in the times of the Mikdash, the more prominent opinion was that Matzah and Maror are not separate mitzvot. זכר למקדש כהלל שהיה כורך פסח מצה ומרור לקיים מה שנאמר על מצות ומרורים יאכלו. Hillel thought it's not three separate mitzvot. If it's three separate mitzvot, you should eat each one separately in order to feel the taste of the matzah, feel the taste of the maror, and feel the taste of Pesach. But if it's only condiments, it's only a way of eating the Pesach as a wealthy man, as a feast. In a feast, you have meat and you have bread and you have all kinds of condiments, which is the maror, and you eat them together. That's a real feast. Then you experience yourself as bnei melachim. You feel yourself as a king. And that was the more prominent way of looking at it during the times of the Mikdash. But when we had no Pesach anymore, we emphasized the telling of the story. And when we emphasize the telling of the story, we have to understand that matzah is still a mitzvah d'oraita, that maror is still a mitzvah d'rabanan, but it's something that we should still do even though we don't have Pesach. And through eating those things, you can connect to the past. You can replay or learn about the past, but you don't necessarily relive the past. Reliving will, Be'ezrat Hashem, be more prominent when we have the Pesach, and Be'ezrat Hashem, נזכה לאכול מן הזבחים ומן הפסחים. The problem is